Hello, welcome to video training. We'll be covering General Ledger, Level 2, Chapter 1, Setting Up Journals. Okay, from the main menu, select General Ledger. Now we'll be going into Maintain Source and Journal Transfer File. Now before doing this, it is assumed that if you watch you've set your chart of account, you've set your chart of accounts up, your chart of accounts are in the system. You really cannot set up your journals unless you have your chart of accounts in there. So it's assumed that you're doing that, and that is completed. We recommend that you print that out so you have a hard copy in front of you. We also highly recommend that you listen to the Understanding the Auto Transfer. It's a good idea to make sure you understand how the system works. And it's also a good idea to make an appointment with one of our GL consultants. Not support, but a GL consultant. Okay, so assuming that you've done all those things, now you're pretty much ready to get started. We're going to be just covering in this section setting up the journals for parts, returns, service, and unit sales. So let's just select Format 1. Easiest way to do this is I'm going to hit the Next key. We ship the system, so it's pretty much all set up. The templates are all set up to make entries for you immediately. There's a chart of accounts. All the numbers are already set up. You could, in theory, just start printing financial statements out on day one. That's not the norm. Normally, dealers want to put their own chart of accounts in, and they have their own idiosyncrasies on how they want the chart of accounts to show up in their own account numbers. So be that as it may, that's probably what you're going to be doing. So we're looking at this right now, and the best thing we recommend doing is leave the journal numbers the same. Like, for example, we always have 10 is our parts journal, 11 is always our returns journal, 20 is always our service, 30 is always our new unit, 31 is always used units. It doesn't really matter what those numbers are. You can change them, but by and large, it's easier when you call support. They look at it, they know exactly what's going on. Another thing that you can't do is if you look at these descriptions here, I'm going to hit the Tab key. And you notice these descriptions. It's very important that you understand how this works. And there again, it's also documented in the manual. When the computer does a pot sale, it's going to analyze the screen as well as the override screen. And it assumes that this line number 1 is your POTS sales account. That's where it's going to go. It doesn't look at the description. It looks at this line 1. So if in fact, take an example, I decided to say, oh, you know what? I'm going to make this line my customer deposit, and I type in customer deposit here, and I put my deposit account here. It's not going to do what I want it to do, because what the system's going to do, it's going to look at a pot sale, it's going to look at line 1, it's going to go to this thing right here, and it's going to use that number. So that number has to be your POTS sales account. Line number 10 is always going to be your deposit account. Line number 11 is always going to be a labor account. So I have to stress the fact you cannot just change these things around and expect the computer to just magically know where to put that stuff. It's looking at these numbers, and it's assuming that miscellaneous sales are going to be line 6. Tax is going to be line 9. There again, highly recommended that you set up an appointment with a tax consultant and go over this in more detail. Okay. What we're going to be doing here is we're going to be just changing account numbers. It's relatively simple. Like I said before, if you have your chart of accounts in front of you, it makes it easy. I'm going to hit the Tab key, and I'm just going to say, you know what, 4,700 is not what I use for a sales account. Maybe mine is 4,100, and you would type it in. If you had a sub-account number, you would also type that in. It goes to the next field, and so all you're really going to be doing is keeping everything pretty much the same, just keying in your account number, substituting your account numbers to what we have, and making decisions. For example, if I click right there, do I want to have separate account numbers for taxable, non-taxable sales? Do I separate wholesale sales versus retail sales? Usually the sample that we sent out is what most dealers do. Most dealers basically just have a sales account. They don't really separate taxable, non-taxable. You know, they can do that in reports. We have lots of reports in the sales journal system that'll separate your taxable sales versus your non-taxable sales. Obviously, the computer's keeping track of your tax right here in your tax account number. So what you're going to be doing is typing in your account numbers. You can type in your account numbers. You can go across, or you can just go down using the up and down arrow key. If you don't know an account number and you say, well, gee, I don't have it, there again, it does make it easier if you have that report in front of you. If you don't have it, if you read what it says, select account number for GL lookup. If you double click on any of those fields, it'll go to the number that you typed in. Obviously, the number that was there was 4100. That's why it's at 4100. You can look up any number you want. If you leave that blank, I can actually list my whole chart of accounts. I can do a keyword search. I can do it by account type. And in this case, I'm looking for a sales account or an income account. And I can pick whatever income account we want. And now that's changed to 4150. So whether you key it in, and here's my cost of goods. Obviously, you're just going to key in the numbers that you want to use. Here's my inventory. And there again, there are some fundamental decisions you need to make. There again, most people just have one inventory account. It gets very complex when you start having all kinds of different inventory accounts by different manufacturers. Sometimes you can do that if you wish. It's not a big deal. But do you really need to do that? You can get reports on that anytime you want, going into the inventory system and say, how much do I have on vendor A? How much do I have on vendor B? So you can get those reports anytime you want. Do you really want to have them on a financial? If you want to, you can. If you don't, well, it's not necessary. So pretty simple. You're going to key in your numbers, whatever you want your numbers to be. Over here, you've got your pay method. There again, there are some decisions. For example, usually cash goes into what we call an undeposited cash account. That means every sale that I do in the pot system, if it's cash, it's going to go into that account number. Credit cards, some dealers have a separate account for all credit card sales. Some just put it into undeposited cash. That's up to you. Most people put it into undeposited cash. Checks, obviously, that's also going into undeposited cash. Now keep in mind, once you make your deposit, that's one of the things that the deposit does. It takes it out of undeposited cash and puts it into your individual checking account where you're depositing the money. So you'd key in all this information that you'd want. When you're done keying this in, now this is very, very important, so pay attention. I made changes here. Okay? If I hit next, those changes will not take any effect at all. When I make changes to the screen, I have to hit the change button. Change. Okay to change. Do I really want to do this? Yes, I do. Also, let's just do that. Obviously, our account numbers have to be, they're always, like we said when we did the chart of accounts, they're usually 4 to the left. They don't need to be exactly 4. If I hit change, it actually will verify my account numbers here. So that's why we're saying you need to have your chart of accounts set up before you can do this. Because if you type in a number that's not in your chart of accounts, like that number's not in my chart of accounts, it basically says there were an invalid account number and you need to fix it, and it'll go to where that invalid number is. So doing this without having a chart of accounts will not work, because you're going to get all errors, because it does verify all these accounts and make sure that they are in your chart of accounts. So there again, step number 1, create your chart of accounts, have the list in front of you. Once that happens, obviously now you can type in whatever you want. Okay, hit change. All set, no errors. Now, once you have your pot journal, now we've changed our pot journal, so it's using our numbers that we want. Now, we also talked about that override. Now, there again, if you listen to the understanding how the transfer works, you're basically looking at this screen saying, okay, this is great. When I do a pot sale, yeah, I want it all to go here. But I am a major manufacturer for, let's just say, Honda and Yamaha, and I want to have separate sales accounts for them. So when I look at my P&L, I can see exactly what those are. So what I want on my P&L is I want to see total sales and cost of goods for Yamaha, total sales, cost of goods for Honda, total sales, pots, and I'm talking about pots, other, and then here's my total pots. So let's do the override. And the override is something where it's relatively simple. You're going to put in your vendor code here that you want to separate. Now, there again, most dealers don't separate every single manufacturer. If they are dealing with 20 different manufacturers, you could if you wanted to. If that's what you prefer to do, you would list each manufacturer here. This is the vendor code that's in the POTS system. If you're not sure what the code is, go to your POTS manager or your POTS person. He knows the codes of all these things here. So if I wanted to separate Honda, for example, I would actually type in the Honda code that's in the inventory system, because it's going to search that pot, that invoice, and pick out these vendors before it goes to that first screen. I would type in the number here. I'm just going to use the same number of above, just for an example. And it's important, you need to key in both of these, because obviously if you're doing a non-taxable sale, do you want to have separate accounts or not? There again, normally this would be a separate number. That would normally live like 4730, or obviously this here wouldn't be my sales account. That would be 6720. And now, there again, your inventory. Do you want to have just one inventory account? Most dealers don't separate, their inventory. You can get reports that'll tell you that. So do you really need to have that in general ledger? Do I need to have a separate inventory account for each manufacturer? That's not normal. Obviously, this here would be all my cost of goods. Okay, so you would enter the vendors that you want to separate. You'd then hit escape, and you'd say, okay to update override. Yes, I'm updating my override. So keep in mind what the computer is going to do when we're doing a pot sale, and it works the same on everything. It takes the invoice. It looks at every single line item on that invoice. It goes to the override first. So it looks here first. This is where it's going to go first. It looks for any of these vendors on that invoice. If any of those vendors are on the invoice, it's going to use this account number for those particular line items. If it doesn't find it there, it now goes over here and uses this number. So, if you're using an override, there again, you'd list the ones you want to separate. Not all dealers use overrides. Some dealers don't use overrides at all. So overrides is something that you don't even really need to use. If you want to just keep things simple, a pot sale is a pot sale, you wouldn't even be using overrides. So what we've done so far is we changed our numbers here. We've updated our override if we plan on using the override. There's also a button here called Options. Okay, now it's important. The one that you really want to use here for your pots is that this is normally checked. But if you want the system to look at your overrides, this really needs to be checkmarked. Make sure that that's checkmarked. Okay, and now we're done. Just to be sure, hit change. Now, once you have your POTS journal set up, we also have a returns journal. So if I hit next, here's my returns journal. We don't expect you to be setting up your returns journal. You don't need to set up your returns journal. If we go back, you'll see a button here, Auto Create Returns Journal. What it'll do, it'll take everything that's in your POTS journal and reverse it, because that's kind of what you want to do. If I'm doing a pot return, I want it to just reverse everything that I have in my POTS journal exactly the way I did in the sale. So what you want to do is when you're done creating and updating your POTS journal, hit the one that says Auto Create Return Journal. You can do this anytime you want. It will give you a message saying this will create your returns journal from the current POTS journal, which is what you want to do. Yes, that's what I want to do. The default is no. So there again, we want to hit yes. This journal is already created. Do you want to update it? It's just telling me that it's out there already. Do you want to update it? Yes, I do. I want you to go in and take everything, all the changes I just made in my POTS journal, put it in my returns journal. And now it's basically telling me one more thing. There's one entry I have to put in here. You must go into your Journal 11, which is your returns journal, and you need to give it a restocking fee. In other words, everything is exactly the same on this POTS journal is returned, except one other thing. The returns journal has a restocking fee. So if you're charging a restocking fee, you need to give it that number. So now if we hit next, you'll see the only thing we're missing here, everything is reversed. The only thing we have to fill in is that restocking fee. If you know your account number that you're using for a restocking fee, you'd actually key it in here now. If you don't know it, you'd actually try to find it. I don't have it, but we'll just stick this number here. But normally you would want a restocking fee in your chart of accounts. You'd then hit change. Okay, now I'll hit next. Okay, so you got a good idea of what's going on here. Your service journal is literally the same thing. You're not going to change these descriptions. This is freight. This is a core charge. That's your sales tax. That's going to be a deposit. That's where you're going to be that other, that charge that you apply on service. This is labor. Now, you can separate labor taxable. You can separate labor non-taxable. You can separate, now there again, this is something too. Do you want to have separate accounts for parts that are sold out of service versus parts that are sold out of the part system? Most people don't. You have reports that'll give you that information. If you wish, you can. So these are the decisions you need to make. It's the same thing. You're going to key in all your numbers. There again, it's a lot easier if you have the chart accounts in front of you. You can just key it in. It shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes for each one. If you double click on it, you can look it up and change the number to whatever you want. It's going to verify it when you hit change. If there's any number that's invalid, it's going to come up and say, I'm not going to do this unless you give me a good number. You also have the same thing here in your pay method. It's basically the same thing. How do you want to separate that? You also, so you're basically just going to change the numbers. You also have an override. Override is normally very similar to parts. There are also options on job codes. For example, there may be separate accounts that you may want to set up for job codes. There again, we'll go over that with the GL consultant if you're looking to do those kinds of things. You can get reports on that. So lots of times you don't really need to do it on a financial statement. Is it really important to say, okay, I want to have it on a financial statement how many tune-ups I did? Probably not. It's not any meaningful information. It is meaningful if I want to run a report in my service department to say, what did I do in tune-ups? What did I do in whatever particular task? But do I need to have it on a financial statement? Probably not. If you wish, you can. But basically, if you want to separate different manufacturers, you can do that also with using your override. So all these things work relatively the same. You key in your numbers, you key in your override. When you're done doing that, you hit change. I'm all set. I'm going to hit next. Same thing with unit sales. I'm going to key in all my different numbers, change them to what you want. Obviously, there are some that don't have a cost, so the cost won't be applied here. There are a couple of other fields here. Obviously, you've got your trade payoff amount, your trade amount. You've got different rebate programs that may have to be applied in here also. On the override on the unit system, it works quite a bit different. On the override on the unit system, you have a few more options. For example, and we'll just go over some of the things you may want to think about here. These are things that we talk about during that consultation with over GL. When you're selling units, you can have it separate when looking at your override. You may want to look at the override by make. For example, maybe you say, look, I want to separate my major unit sales by make. What did I do in Honda? What did I do in Yamaha? That's one option. You may want to say, no, I want to separate it by make, but then model. I don't want to just know what I did in Yamaha. I want to know what I do in Yamaha and outboard motors, what I do in Yamaha and motorcycles, what I do in Yamaha and ATVs. So you may want to separate it by make, then model. Now, there are other options, like maybe I just want to buy product. When I say model, I mean product. For example, maybe I say, I don't really care if it's Honda, Yamaha, or whatever. I want to know what I'm doing in motorcycles, what I'm doing outboard motors, what I'm doing in boats. So there again, there are lots of options on how you're going to set this source up here. Depending on how you're going to do that, you would key in your make code, which is from your make file that you created in the unit system. Or you would type in your product code, which you used when you created your product file in the unit system. So we have a product file, we have a make code. What you type here will match up to what you typed in there. It'll look it up. If it finds it here, it uses whatever number you want. Also, there may be other charges that you want to put in here. For example, Some people want to have a separate account for registration fees, a separate account for insurance, so that you can separate things a lot of different ways. And there again, when you get into this area, it's a good idea to talk to our GL consultant, and he will really point you in the right direction on how to set this up, because there are so many different options and so many different ways that dealers like to do it. Every dealer is somewhat different. So it's good to really all get on the same page. What's good to know is the system is flexible enough and powerful enough where you can set it up so it'll work the way you want. And there again, it works the same way. You basically set it up the way you want. You put in how you want it to separate things, and it'll separate into any account number you wish to do. They all work the same way. You hit OK, and that's done. You make any changes you want. OK. The next thing is a use journal. Now, you definitely want to have a separate use journal. Now, most dealers do not use an override for use journals. I mean, they usually just don't usually get that sophisticated with you to use. They just want to sell it. That's it. You can if you wish. If you wish, you can. But on an average, most dealers that are selling used products, they just have the main template. They're not going to separate it a lot of different ways and things like that. Okay, what we've gone over here is Format 1, which is looking at parts, returns, service, new and used sales. And basically this is the template that's going to get looked at every time you do a part sale, a return, a service, and a unit sale. Okay, this concludes this section.